something huge just happened in the U.S. House. A really controversial new election law called the Save America Act just got pushed through. It's backed by some major political players, and honestly, it could completely change the way you vote. So today, we're going to break down exactly what's in this bill, why everyone is so divided on it, and what could happen next. Mark this date, February 11th, 2026. That's the day the House passed the bill, and in doing so, pretty much kicked off a massive political fight over the future of American elections. And yeah, this was not just some routine vote. No way. This was a legislative showdown with huge implications for every single voter. And it sparked this incredibly fierce debate about what voting in America should even look like. Okay, so what is actually in the SAVE Act? Let's really get into the nuts and bolts of what it would do to federal elections if it ever became law. So its full name is the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. A bit of a mouthful, I know, but basically it's a huge piece of federal legislation, and its main goal? To create one brand new uniform set of rules for registering and voting in all federal elections, coast to coast. The whole bill is really built on four main pillars. First up, it would require you to show documentary proof of citizenship. We're talking a passport or a birth certificate just to get registered. Second, it would mandate a photo ID for every single type of voting, whether you're in person or voting absentee. It would also force states to use federal databases to clean non-citizens off the voter rolls. And finally, it brings in criminal penalties for election officials who don't follow the rules. These are some major nationwide changes. And right there, that brings us to the heart of this entire conflict. You've got supporters who frame this as an absolutely crucial step for election integrity. But on the complete other side, you have critics who see it as nothing more than a giant barrier to vote for millions of perfectly eligible Americans. It's two totally different ways of looking at the very same law. So let's dig into that central conflict a little more. I mean, it really boils down to a classic political tension, right? The constant push and pull between wanting more security versus protecting everyone's access to the ballot box. Okay, so the argument for the bill, which is being pushed by people like Representative Chip Roy and former President Donald Trump, is pretty straightforward. They say it's essential to stop non-citizens from voting and, in their view, to restore public trust in our election system. But, and this is a huge but, here's the crucial counterpoint. Voting rights advocates and election experts pretty much all agree that voting by non-citizens, which, by the way, is already illegal, is extremely rare. This single fact is really central to the entire argument against the bill. And that leads us right to the case against the bill. Opponents are arguing that by demanding all these specific documents, the law creates massive unnecessary hurdles for legitimate voters. They say it's basically voter suppression, and they point to specific groups they believe would be hit the hardest: low-income citizens, older adults, young people, and even married women whose names on their IDs might not match their birth certificates anymore. So, with a divide this sharp, you're probably wondering, how in the world did this bill even manage to pass the House? Let's shift gears and look at the political battle that played out on Capitol Hill. The final vote count was incredibly close, 218 to 213. I mean, that is a razor-thin margin, and it fell almost perfectly along party lines, which just goes to show you how politically charged this whole thing is. In fact, get this, only one single Democrat broke ranks to vote yes on the bill, Representative Henry Quiler of Texas. You can bet his vote got a lot of attention, especially considering how united the rest of his party was against it. And speaking of that opposition, Democratic leaders like Hakeem Jeffries in the House and Chuck Schumer in the Senate have been really vocal, just absolutely condemning the bill. They're calling it a partisan attack on voting rights that's designed to disenfranchise minority and underrepresented voters. So after just barely squeaking by in the House, the SAVE Act is now heading over to the U.S. Senate. But let me tell you, its path forward there is anything but guaranteed. And here is the single biggest reason why. the Senate filibuster. It's this long-standing Senate rule that basically means most bills need 60 votes to pass, not just a simple 51. With Democrats totally united against it, and even some Republicans a little hesitant, hitting that 60-vote magic number, well, it seems incredibly unlikely right now. Okay, so we've covered the bill itself, we've covered the politics, but let's bring this all down to a more personal level. How could the SAVE Act actually affect you, the individual voter? Well, if this act ever actually becomes law, the process of voting could change pretty dramatically. You might have to go digging for your birth certificate or passport just to get registered. A specific photo ID would suddenly be mandatory for every single vote, whether you're at the polls or voting by mail. And the federal rules for who's eligible would become much stricter than what most of us are used to in our own states. So at the end of the day, supporters see this as creating one uniform, secure national standard for voting. But the big warning from opponents is that it completely undermines the long-held American tradition of states running their own elections, putting a whole lot more power in Washington in a way that could actually hurt, not help, voter access. And all of this brings us to our final section and the big, looming question over this entire debate. What is really, truly at stake here? This isn't just about one bell. It really represents a fundamental battle over the entire direction of American elections. It's this deep conflict between prioritizing voter integrity versus ensuring voter access. And that clash is almost certainly going to help define the political landscape for the 2026 midterms and probably well beyond. And that leaves us with the central question of this whole explainer. And it's a question I'm going to leave with you. Is the Save America Act a necessary reform to ensure election security, or is it a calculated move towards voter suppression? The answer to that could very well shape the future of how we all vote in America.